Santa Monica runs on more than sunshine and ocean air. It runs on good information. The Santa Monica Daily Press delivers the local news you need every day, free and independent. But free news isn't free to produce. That's why we need members like you. Join today at smdp.com/membership. The Santa Monica Daily Press, keeping our community informed. Hey, this is Brian. You're about to listen to episode 2 of A Developing Story. This series is meant to be experienced in order, so if you haven't listened to the first episode, you should do that before you do this. This series sometimes contains adult language and may not be appropriate for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Also, a selection of Santa Monica Daily Press articles that cover the topics in this episode will be included in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. And a reminder to please follow the series and tell your friends. Your support of this podcast and local journalism is both needed and appreciated. Thanks.
Next on The Californians.
This is one of Saturday Night Live's most famous sketches, The Californians.
I was thinking I'd take Candy View Drive over to San Vicente, and then make a left and come 405 north. And from there, just get off Mulholland.
Totally like that.
If you've seen it, you know that the gag is that it's a soap opera in which the characters only talk about the hottest topic in Los Angeles, avoiding the terrible traffic.
Stuart, why are you home so early?
I skipped Wilshire and took Beverly over to Santa Monica and took that all the way up.
For years, when people have complained about the prospect of more development in Santa Monica, one of the main reasons given was the potential increase in traffic. After all, more apartments mean more people, and more people mean more cars. Over time, fears like this bled into local zoning and building codes. Santa Monica justifiably earned a reputation as a very tough place to develop housing. But that changed in 2022, when one local developer found a totally legal way to build thousands of units in Santa Monica without Santa Monica's permission. I'm Brian Peter Falk, and this is A Developing Story, a limited podcast series from Santa Monica Daily Press. We'll explore housing development one story at a time and try to figure out what those stories tell us about the future and ourselves. This is episode 2, The Loophole.
This podcast is supported in part by the Montana Avenue Merchants Association, inviting you to experience the best of Santa Monica. Montana Avenue is home to more than 150 shops, cafes, and restaurants across 10 walkable blocks. From boutique fashion to fitness studios to coffee bars and gourmet dining, it's where locals and visitors come to shop, dine, and unwind. Plan your visit today at montanaave.com.
In 2021, every municipality in California was trying to figure out how to comply with the latest housing element, a state mandate about the number of new housing units every city would have to allow over the next 8 years. As you may remember from episode 1, the required number of units in Santa Monica was nearly 9,000. The local body ultimately responsible for submitting a plan to meet the needs of the element was Santa Monica's 7-member city council, a part-time position. This is former council member Gleam Davis.
The way it works in cities like Santa Monica and in the majority of cities in California is you have a part-time city council, including a part-time mayor. They set policy at what I'll call the 30,000-foot level. But really, it's a strong city manager form of government. The city manager really runs the city. So the city council sets policy, tells the city manager what to do, and then the city manager goes forth and does it.
The deliberation over the housing element not only involved council members and the city manager, but the local planning commission and city staff, all of them haggling over the variables. Inevitably, there were disagreements and delays.
So it's a very lengthy, it's a very interactive process. There's lots of opportunities for the public to have input, both in terms of the public meetings of the Planning Commission and the City Council, but also it's always discussed in the public. People go to neighborhood group meetings and other group meetings to explain it. It's complicated, But at the end of the day, you get a roadmap for what Santa Monica, in theory, should be able to accommodate housing-wise over the next few years.
After all of that input, the city submitted a housing element plan to the state before the October 2021 deadline, and it was rejected. The city prepared a second plan. That one was rejected too. Reworking these plans took many months. Technically, the city's housing element was out of compliance during all of that time. Still, delays like this were typical across California. This is Daily Press Editor-in-Chief Matt Hall.
So the city was out of compliance for several months at least. And it kind of was, if not expected, then not unusual. Lots of cities find themselves out of compliance with these projects and these policies over a period of time. But no one really expects anything to happen. It's kind of a no harm, no foul during that process.
We got the letter from the state, I think September 1st, 2nd, that said, you're in substantial compliance. We accept the element. You just need to ratify.
Phil Brock was on the city council at that time. All they needed to do was ratify the element, vote on its final language. Phil blames a scheduling problem for what happened next.
The Planning Commission had to examine it and ratify it first before it came to the council. What should have happened is the city manager should have had the Planning Commission convene within a week, and we would convene the following week. Instead, the Planning Commission went to their normal meeting, and the City Council went to their normal meeting, which was the first or second week in October.
But sticking to the normal schedule created one last delay of about 3 weeks. 3 more weeks before the plan could be officially sent to the state. 3 more weeks of non-compliance. Considering the months of delays that had already happened, 3 more weeks didn't seem to matter. Or maybe they did.
So if they'd known the situation they were in, what they obviously should have done is call an emergency meeting. You know, you can do that with 24 hours notice, and you should have had an emergency meeting with Planning Commission, City Council in the same room, approve it 1, approve it 2, boom, done. But they didn't. They just reverted to their normal schedule, and that took them several weeks, and that turned out to be a significant unforced error for the city because they just didn't know the consequences that were looming over their heads as a result of that.
Remember that being out of compliance had never been a big deal in the past. That was because the state had no real mechanism to force municipalities into compliance. At least that's what many thought. But it turns out there actually is an enforcement mechanism, a way to punish non-compliant cities. It's a loophole in the housing element called the builder's remedy. And there were plenty of people who had simply ignored it.
It's been one of these things that's in a staff report buried on whatever, line 56 of page 39 of a 145-page report. Like, it's always been in there. And what's really interesting is if you go back and look at even some of our coverage leading up to the problem, its potential is in news stories. So one of the things that's always come up when you do a housing element is people always say, well, what if we don't comply, right? Folks who don't like housing have always said, what happens if we don't do this? And staff members and experts have always said, well, if you don't comply, you could lose control of local zoning.
And when you lose control of your zoning, the state controls it for you. That means local developers could theoretically get their building plans approved in Sacramento, skipping Santa Monica's Byzantine building codes altogether. But still, no developer in the history of California had ever made a builder's remedy claim, not a single one. As penalties go, it was, as Gleam Davis once told the Daily Press, a toothless tiger.
So the builder's remedy had been on the books for a decade. It wasn't something that sprung up at the time of the housing element. It had been there for a while. But all previous housing elements and the builder's remedy were all effectively toothless tigers. So basically, it used to be the housing element was a couple of pages that said, okay, you want us to build 6,000 units or 3,000 units or whatever the number was. Okay, we promised to zone for that. Thank you very much. And then it would go up to the state and the state would rubber stamp it. So there wasn't really any problem getting your housing element certified. So the builder's remedy never came into play.
It was kind of a mythical danger. It was something that was on paper that no one had ever believed would happen, right? Like sea monster of ye old navigation. That's kind of what it was like.
And now let's call the roll, please, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Parra.
But in 2022, at a Santa Monica City Council meeting, the builder's remedy monster became very real.
Councilmember Brock.
I'll tell you about that after this.
This podcast is brought to you in part by St. John's Women's Health and Wellness Institute in Santa Monica. Experience care designed by women, for women, in a 7,000 square foot women-centric facility that blends medical expertise with education and holistic support. Whether you need well women exams, maternity care, mental health resources, or educational workshops, Providence St. John's has you covered, with your own patient navigator and commitment to empowering you through every stage of life. Call 833-34-HER and make your health a priority.
When you advertise in the Santa Monica Daily Press, you're doing two things at once: supporting local journalism and putting your business in front of the most engaged audience in town. Our readers live, work, and spend here. Print, web, and newsletters, we are trusted by thousands every single day. That means your ad drives calls, clicks, and customers while showing your commitment to the community. Support local news, grow your business. Advertise with the Santa Monica Daily Press.
Okay, so we have public input, public comment.
City council meetings in Santa Monica are pretty predictable affairs. A period of public comment, staff reports, council debate and voting, a closed session. They are famously way too long. But one meeting in October of 2022 was a bit unusual. Daily Press editor Matt Hall explains.
And it's just a regular, routine council meeting. Nothing on the agenda. Looks like it's going to be wild fireworks. It looks like it's an administrative, boring discussion where council members are going to debate, dotting I's and crossing T's to get themselves over the hump. And we have a reporter. Her name was Emily Sawicki, who worked here at the time. She was in the council chambers watching the meeting. And one of the council members says, "Hey, what about this letter we got that says this thing about the builder's remedy and we can't control our zoning?" Like, he was asking a question. And another council member sort of looked at him and was like, "Shh, don't talk about that. Like, we don't want to talk about that right now." Like, they actively sort of shushed him. When a council member turns to another council member and says, "Don't talk about that in public," you're like, "Oh, we're definitely asking about that." And so she did. And that's where we then started to pull on this thread of, oh, what does this mean? This means we actually fell out of compliance, and now we've lost our zoning rules.
The letter submitted to the council was a shocker. It detailed 14 development projects totaling around 4,000 apartments. All of them had invoked the builder's remedy, and most of them had been filed during that last 3-week window of noncompliance, the one in which the city council had waited to ratify their housing plan. 14 surprise housing projects were coming to Santa Monica, and they had already been approved by the state. This is Gleam Davis.
It was a bit of a controversial meeting, and I say that because some council members went after staff and said, "You didn't tell us this could happen. Why didn't you warn us that this was going to happen if we sent up a non-compliant housing element?" Well, the fact of the matter is, if you went back and looked at prior staff presentations, they didn't use the term builder's remedy. But what they did say in their presentations was that, yes, if we don't submit a compliant housing element, we can lose control of local zoning, and developers can submit projects that do not comply with our local zoning restrictions. It's a little unflattering on me to say it, but I sort of had an "I told you so." I mean, I had voted against the previous 2 housing elements because I didn't think they would be certified as compliant, and they weren't, in fact. And I knew that, again, this was a possibility. But I was unable to convince a majority of my colleagues on the council at the time. And so my first reaction was, see, this is what happens. I can't use it because this is probably a family podcast, but, it's the FAFO, and I think that's really what's going on here. And my second reaction was, well, now we have to do something. Not because there's anything wrong inherently with taller, denser buildings. I don't have an emotional aversion to them. But the thing that bothered me about the builder's remedy was a complete lack of local control.
The council member who asked about that letter and Santa Monica's apparent loss of local zoning control was Phil Brock.
Zoning is an integral part of a city's independence. And Sacramento 600 miles from here is not a group that should be dictating to Ventura, Oxnard, Santa Monica, Cudahy, Vernon, wherever, how they zone their cities. Because the reason residents elect city council is to control all of that, because you're close. Otherwise, you just elect the legislature and not have any individual cities.
Once the Department of Housing and Community Development said, wait a minute, we're not just going to rubber stamp whatever you send to us, now it all of a sudden became a very potent weapon.
Of course, it's only a weapon if somebody uses it. The big question Matt Hall and other local journalists had was, who had invoked the builder's remedy? Who sent that letter to the city council?
It turns out that letter was sent by a prominent local development attorney named Dave Rand, who's very good at his job. And at a certain point, Dave was sitting in his office, doing his job, looking at ways to facilitate development, and he realized, oh, Santa Monica's out of compliance. And as far as we understand it, he did a little bit of basic research, and he talked to some folks at the state and said, you know, there's this thing here. How does it work? Is this in effect? And essentially, he realized and was told the builder's remedy rules are now in play.
Mr. Rand's client was a developer called NMS. You may have seen their signs around town on construction sites and new apartment buildings. He was the one who sent the letter to the city council detailing the 14 projects.
Some of them were massive developments in single-family territory. Some of them were slightly smaller. Some of them were huge and dense. But they were the ones who really kicked this into overdrive.
This is Phil Brock.
During that time, that developer started scribbling literally on legal pads. He owned a ton of property in the city, and he started scribbling. Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And they came down to planning, saying, these are builder's remedy here. They're just on legal pads. We've just scribbled notes, but here's what we're going to do here. We're going to do 18 stories here, 13 stories here. We're going to take advantage of this builder's remedy lapse.
The 14 plans, such as they were not for townhomes or 3-story apartment buildings. These were residential high-rises. 3 of them were 18 stories high. 2 other developers also filed builder's remedy projects, raising the total to 16. If they all move forward, they would add 4,260 units of housing to Santa Monica. Nothing like this had ever happened in the entire state of California. Overnight, Santa Monica became the poster child for the very first builder's remedy controversy. Matt Hall.
It wasn't necessarily that Santa Monica did something that other municipalities didn't, because many cities in that year fell into the builder's remedy. The timing was just that we were the first. And Santa Monica has this reputation as having an outsized impact many times. And this is just one of those weird features of the city where sometimes stuff just happens here before other places. And this is also worth noting, the particular circumstances are a little bit different here, because a small rural town in Northern California doesn't have a giant development shark circling them all the time. And so that's part of why it hit here more quickly than other places, was this particular company that was particularly good at legal shenanigans was waiting for an opportunity. One emerged, and they were not going to miss it.
When word of the builder's remedy and more than 4,000 units of new housing hit the pages of the daily press, sleepy Santa Monica got a very loud wake-up call.
The average resident is often late to the mark when it comes to realizing things that are going to affect them. It's just the nature of the world we live in. But there were folks who were paying attention. There were folks who were angry about this. There were folks who were happy about this. People were talking about it. The city council was very much in overdrive around what are they going to do to try and stop this. And based on the letter of the law, there's almost nothing they could do. There was no legal mechanism to prevent this from going forward. There were some cities who filed lawsuits about it. None of them have prevailed. And this is sort of like the old you can't fight City Hall analogy, but scaled up. Because sure, you could fight the state of California. It's the state of California who controls the laws. Even if you were going to try and score a legal victory, they could just change the laws to undermine it. Like, you weren't going to beat the state on this, and indeed nobody has.
But where the threat of lawsuits failed, reality prevailed. Because it's one thing to say you're going to build 4,200 units of housing. It's another thing to do it.
just because you have the legal right to build a project doesn't mean you have the money to do so. And many of these projects that NMS filed, they still had to pencil out. The developer still had to be able to physically go to a bank, get a loan, and break ground and build that project. And many of these are not actually feasible from the economic standpoint. And what ended up happening is NMS gave up 13 of their 14 builder's remedy projects in exchange for streamlined permitting and processing for several other more feasible projects throughout the city.
In May of 2023, Santa Monica City Council voted unanimously to adopt a settlement agreement with the developers. 13 of the 14 NMS projects were withdrawn and resubmitted on a more modest scale, and the city agreed to approve all of them. Both parties also stopped suing each other. Here are Phil Brock and Gleam Davis.
That particular developer was suing Santa Monica, and we were already suing him over violations in his rent-controlled apartments, things that he was doing, which were frankly sleazy and inappropriate. You looked at that situation, and we established a settlement that stopped all but, I think, one of their builder's remedy projects, ended up releasing him from liability and lawsuits as well.
Time is money in the development industry. So that was pretty, I think, effectively dealt with. But it did light a fire under the city council because there were more builders' remedy projects likely to come down the pike. And at that point, I think some of the people on the city council who, what I deem skeptics, were skeptical of the numbers, were skeptical of the process, didn't want to devote a lot of city land to affordable housing, didn't want to encourage denser development, finally realized that they had two choices. And one choice was to be passive-aggressive with the state and face the builder's remedy, or to adopt a housing element, which is a commitment by the city to the state to do certain things, and live with that. The council underestimated folks' willingness to take advantage of the opportunities made available to them. There's this sense sometimes, oh, that will never happen in Santa Monica. And second, that comes out of someone's mouth, it happens, right? So I think sometimes you have to get knocked upside the head, and that's what it was.
What many saw as a crisis was averted, at least for the moment. But remember that 13 out of the 14 builders' remedy projects submitted by NMS were withdrawn. So that left one. I decided to go see it. All right, I am westbound on Broadway, and I'm coming up to 6th Street. I'm taking a right on 6th Street, using my turn signal, unlike everyone else in Los Angeles. And I am looking for... This person just cut me off. That's fantastic. And I am looking for 1437. Okay, I've parked here on 6th Street between Santa Monica Boulevard and Broadway, and I am walking up here to 1437 6th, which is on the east side of the street. I was here a couple months ago, and there was still a building here. It was like a stucco, kind of beige apartment building, very common here in Santa Monica, but now it is an empty lot. That building is gone, and what is here instead is just some construction fencing and a sign on the fencing that says Notice of Pending Design Review. I happen to know that design review has been completed. And it also says that the site address is not just 1437 6th Street, it is also 1433. So what that is right now is a home next door to it that looks like it's multifamily units in the back, so that's going to come down too. It does not look like anybody is living here. And it's going to be these two lots, 1433 and 1437, are going to be this building, the last of the NMS Builders Remedy projects. And it has a pretty interesting history, actually. Here's my understanding of this project. So that company, NMS, those letters stand for Neil M. Schechter, a wealthy local developer. In early 2024, NMS lost control of several of its properties due to lawsuits and foreclosures. Mr. Schechter then died in November. So this project at 1437 6th Street eventually ended up in the hands of a private equity firm in New York. This past February, that firm presented renderings to the City Council for the development it plans to build. It features 172 units in a pair of adjoining 18-story towers. So looking at this lot, it's sort of hard to imagine how an 18-story building is going to fit in here. I've seen the plans, and there's an artist rendering also here on the fence in front of this empty lot. I will say the building, in my opinion, is pretty nice looking. Views of the ocean from the upper floors, I'm sure, will be stunning. I guess that's the good news. But a lot of people are concerned about height, and this building will dwarf all the homes around it. It won't be the tallest building in Santa Monica, but it will be the tallest thing in this immediate neighborhood by far. Still, it's just one building. If it indeed does get built, it will be the only final product of Santa Monica's builder's remedy mess.
Builder's remedy projects were a huge boogeyman, but I guess like the monster under the bed, they turned out to not really be real, right? The builder's remedy just didn't really do much for actual physical development. But what it did do was highlight the new teeth that the state of California has given to its housing regulations. What it did do was really give a new attitude and a reinvigorated sense of swagger to developers, who prior to this point had come to cities almost hat in hand and said, "Please will you let us build some housing in your cities, kind sir? We would very much like to put a few units on this corner property." And cities, for a long time, treated the developers quite poorly, and council members loved to negotiate from the dais and demand concessions, and I'm going to make you put one more unit here and three there, and you're going to change X and change Y, and that was very much the process. Now a developer comes in and says, "We have adhered to state law. You can't stop us." And they will do what the state law requires them to do, and they will do no more. And that is a very different scenario. And it has very real impacts for residents.
Is the monster under the bed really imaginary? The builder's remedy controversy was short-lived, but that loophole could be exploited again if Santa Monica doesn't meet the goals of the latest housing element.
Builder's remedy is a threat that if you're not checking all the boxes that Sacramento wants you to check, then the state will come in, rip out your housing code, rip out your planning code, and they will take over and run your city for you.
This is local architect and slow-growth advocate Mario Fonda Bonardi.
And I'll tell you where it's going to happen, and it's going to be quite ugly. It looks something like this. If you're not meeting your 6,000 affordable housing needs, at the end of year 4, you're going to have 3,000 of them done. Now you're short 3,000. Guess what? Builder's remedies can now be imposed upon your city because you are not following state law. If you don't do these things right, we will come down and do it to you. Then they pass a whole set of laws that do exactly the same thing, that get us to do it to ourselves.
What Mario is talking about is a new wave of state-sanctioned development that seems much more effective at building a lot of housing than the builder's remedy loophole. It's already arrived in Santa Monica and has a lot of people on edge.
What has really sent development into overdrive is sort of the son of the builder's remedy.
This result is bad news for the immediate 2 or 3 block area where that has happened.
I think 50 years from now, people will look back and say, you destroyed a lot of old houses, a lot of old apartments. You got rid of the feeling of neighborhoods.
That's in the next episode of A Developing Story. But before you click on that next episode, please give the series a rating. 5 stars is, of course, appreciated. You can also leave a review. The more ratings and reviews, the more people will listen. Thanks.
A Developing Story is a limited podcast series from Santa Monica Daily Press. The series was created, written, and hosted by Brian Peter Falk. The series was produced by Brian, Matthew Hall, and Ross Furukawa. It was edited and mixed by Alan Kraut. Original music by Brian and Alan. If you have a question or comment, you can email the series at podcast@smdp.com.